Hi there, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. We're the podcast that takes you on journeys through the lives of those who have already embraced the international lifestyles. Whether you're an expat, a digital nomad, or someone who's dreaming of those lifestyles, this is your passport to a world of insight. We dive deep into the hearts and minds of the overseas lifestyle professionals, the authors, and researchers. Join us in this fun adventure as we deconstruct all the elements of expat and nomadic lifestyles, one captivating story at a time. Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. This is Doreen with Nomadic Diaries. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to Maria Garaitonandia. I'm doing my best, Maria. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Doreen. It's a pleasure to be here.
So Maria specializes in global leadership development training and coaching. She has over 20 years of experience working with clients in Latin America and the US at all sorts of levels of responsibility and across many different industries. She offers her clients solutions in leadership competencies, including intercultural and global team management, effective communication, and coaching. Welcome, Maria.
Thank you so much.
Well, we know that this is a big job.
It
Tell
sure is.
tell us a little bit about your background and what drew you to this work in cross-cultural experiences.
It's very interesting. I was born in the US, but my parents were the first wave of Cuban immigrants to leave, thinking that they would be back within months. But after the Bay of Pig invasion, they realized they were never going back to Cuba. So I am first generation US born. And my father, when I was very young, was transferred to Italy as an expat. I remember my mom saying to me, "We're moving to Italy." And I'm like, "What's that?" And is there
Yes,
Scooby-Doo there? Can I watch Scooby-Doo there? Of course, of course. Well, of course, there was no Scooby-Doo back
yes,
in the
yes,
day.
yes.
But we moved to different countries, Italy, Puerto Rico, Mexico. So I spent a good 10 or 11 years moving from one place to another. And
Mm.
that made an impact because I really loved it very much and thought that I would go into foreign service.
Yes.
I studied international relations, but life had different plans for me. So I wound up in Mexico, married to a Mexican friend of mine, raising my kids. And eventually, when I went back to study my master's, I discovered cross-cultural management. It was
Mm.
a relatively new field of study, and I realized that I had a vocation for it.
Yes.
And I researched it a little bit more, and I started working for some companies as a subcontractor
Mm-hmm.
while also teaching negotiation skills and all kinds of different leadership skills. So I was able to fuse my love for all things intercultural with leadership, and eventually came up with this, I guess you could say, a hybrid where now I am dedicated to helping leaders in different parts of the world who also have virtual teams in all
Yes.
parts of the world and
Yes.
have to
Yes.
be effective. So
Yeah.
that's pretty much where my career path took me.
Well, that's very exciting. So you were able to parlay your experiences of being the child of an immigrant, the cross-cultural experience between Cuba and the US and Italy and then Mexico into a career. And so congratulations, because I believe the more people we have in the field who are heart-centered and really connected to the human experience across cultures, the more you can help sew the world together, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So
So tell me, how does the unique background of someone like yourself, how does it contribute to your belief in the potential of global leadership? So you have all these little humans who are growing up as little children, and many of them we're now in the third or fourth generation of this. My daughter was a third generation TCK. I'm wondering, how does that background contribute to that potential?
When you have to be the new kid
Mm,
every couple of years, and you have
mm,
to be adjusting and adapting so that you won't feel left out or excluded, you learn real fast that there are things that you have to start doing.
yes.
Them, I would say, as you probably know, and your daughter probably knows, that your identity can be pretty fluid in certain senses, that you might be considered the nerd in this school, and then guess what? You're going to move to another place. And you're like, you know what? I think I'm going to experiment, see if I could be a jock, or see if I could be, one of the popular kids, or see. But the way that you figure that out is by learning how to observe,
Mm,
up real quick on what the dynamics are that you are seeing, listening to the language. I can tell you in one school I learned really quick. I came from one school where the kids used profanity a lot. And then I moved to
wow.
another school where that was not cool because it was in a
Yes.
different culture and you don't use profanity. Really quick, how to adjust even my language or the words that I was using, what was considered cool or interesting in one school was very different from another. If you look at it from a macro level, when we are going from one culture, when we're talking about corporate culture, to another corporate culture, there are also these ideas, these cliques, these environments where we
Mm,
need to learn what is going to be recognized and
mm,
rewarded and what will not. So anybody who is in a leadership position, working, perhaps moving from one industry or company to another, would probably benefit from a lot of these skills that you learn at a very early age as a third culture kid.
So, how would you suggest that third culture kids articulate these skills? Because I think what we see is that there's lots of people out there who have these innate leadership skills, but they're kind of invisible. I call them superpowers. But if you put superpower on your resume, I don't know how far you're going to get. so, talk to me about that part, please.
Do you mean about articulating it as if you were selling yourself, or do you mean how you use them in a particular case?
Well, I think that's a even better question because I think in explaining to other people who you are
Mhm.
and why you are, without getting the entire story, which no one has time for, is a skill in itself. I think the articulation of the experience and the meaning that was built into that experience is important.
Yes, and that brings me to my famous quote unquote disclaimer method that I usually recommend leaders use, especially when they are having to work with a new team, a new group, especially if they are of a different culture than them. I
Mm-hmm.
was just recently coaching a new CEO from one country, and she was going to be working in a new
Mm-hmm.
country. And she knew that she was probably going to be coming into the job being a little bit more direct in her style, the people who she was going to be working with. And that is something I'm pretty familiar with because being a Cuban American kid who eventually, as I grew, I learned that, for example, the time that I lived in Mexico, people are a little more subdued and diplomatic than my
Yes.
family was. So I had to learn to give a type of disclaimer. So what is my disclaimer? It's
Yes.
basically when you're working with a new group of people to talk about what the rules of the game are. So in academic terms, you would talk about the meta talk, right? We're talking about how we're going to talk. But
Mm-hmm.
a disclaimer is basically to give people the heads up. Hey, you know what? Let's not ignore the fact that we're coming from different frames of references and culture. I'm
Mm-hmm.
aware of it. I have the best intention. It's important to state your intention. I have the
That's
best
great.
intention. I want us to work well together. I want to make sure that we create synergy, and we have to realize that we are coming from different frames of reference. Please let
Yeah.
us make sure that if there is noise, we can sift through the noise and clarify and move forward. And I usually tell people, look, there's a possibility that nobody will call you on it, but they'll remember it and they won't take things personally when there's a little bit of that dissonance.
In giving your disclaimer, it feels to me maybe you're doing several things. You're sort of setting a vision or a goal in a way of harmony without using the word. Yes. And you're also describing a little bit about this vague, the difference of experiences and how vague it is. Is that correct?
Yes, because if you ignore it, it's going to come back to bite you in the butt, is what I say. You can't ignore it. If you ignore it and you assume, you know what they say when you assume, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So if you go ahead and keep assuming that everyone is going to process the same way you do and react the same way you do, you're going to be in for a cruel awakening. So
Yeah.
it's very important to address these issues, especially in the beginning. And the sooner the better, because then that way people
Yes.
remember it and they feel more comfortable addressing things when there is that
Yes.
conflict, right?
Yeah. So tell me about some of the specific leadership competencies that you find are in TCKs compared to monocultural populations who are very rooted in one place.
Well, it has been said that third culture kids do tend to have certain abilities in leadership. And I would say the first one, simply being able to be more observant, probably contributes towards situational leadership, being able to realize in what circumstances you need to be more focused on relationship and in what circumstances you can be more focused on tasks. So just having that possibility of discerning when to use one style versus another probably comes from having to be the new kid every time you had to switch schools, right? So
Sure.
the observational piece for sure is there. I would also say that the flexibility, the flexibility and also being able to be more sociable and win people over. Third culture kids tend to learn how to make friends quickly. It is also, I guess,
Yeah.
one of these adaptability things that
Yeah.
we learn. So we tend to solve things by trying to win people over. You know, in the disc, we are usually high in the
Yes.
influencing.
Yes. Yes.
So
Yes.
so that's important. Being able to pick up on the energy and the vibe, being able to speak to people in their language, and by language, not just literally, right? But also figuratively, being able to pick out maybe somebody who's a little bit more of an introvert and connect that way, and maybe somebody who's more of an
Mm,
extrovert and
mm.
connect using their language, adapting the style, the language. All of these things are key. I think that any leader who is successful usually has that ability to adapt and adjust.
I was listening to the radio yesterday, and they were talking about CEOs and the place of the modern day CEO in relationship to the upcoming political elections in the US. I was surprised to hear several people say that many of the CEOs in the corporate world are just wonderful people who have good intentions at heart for a lot of people. And I thought, I wonder how that relates to TCK-ness.
I don't know. I honestly, to be honest, Doreen, I'm an optimist in the sense that I believe in the goodness of human beings. I do. I do believe that most people are good, regardless of
I agree.
whether they're
Yeah.
CEOs or not. I think that most people don't
Yep.
wake up in the morning thinking how they can be a jerk, but rather thinking,
Right.
let me see, I'm
Right.
doing my best and I'm a good person and I'm trying to be considerate, etc. I don't know if TCK-ness has contributed to that, but I think that seeing that there are good people all over the
Yes.
world opens you up and you realize that the human heart is good.
And you focus on that. I think it's not just the awareness of it. It's the definite paying time, attention, detail, and energy to that fact that makes a difference, right? So how does that look for you? How do you help people and organizations enhance these global leadership invisible skills that they have?
Well, just what we were just talking about, depending on your perspective and how you approach things will make a huge difference. I mean, if you approach your team, for example, I was coaching another woman and she was frustrated because she had a new team, and granted that the situation was stressful. You have to deal with a lot more with less a lot of times
Yes.
in the
Yes.
organizations. She was
Yeah.
frustrated because she was finding that many people in her team were resisting change and they
Mm,
were not very motivated, etc. But instead of looking at it from the point of view of, oh my goodness, how frustrating, and these people just don't get it, and they,
mhm.
us, it's important, especially when you're at TCK, you learn that the division between us and them is not really as defined as you think. So changing the idea of us versus them, those silos have to disappear. It's
Mhm.
important to see that we're all us, we're all
Yes.
one organization.
Yes.
It's not operations versus sales. It's not, we're all we're
Right.
trying to move towards the same goal. So I think starting with that and realizing that everybody is probably wanting to do their best. Sometimes there are circumstances, or sometimes even the way that you talk to each other. You're coming from a stressful
Mm,
situation, and instead of being vulnerable and doing the disclaimer, you could start off with the disclaimer of, we're facing a lot of difficulty right here, and I'm a little frustrated because I don't know how to move forward. I
yeah.
have the best intention. Please tell me how we can make this better. It
And
makes a huge difference.
and that's like Brené Brown talks about being vulnerable all the time.
Exactly.
We're talking about these silos, and do you have two or three, or just two things that help to dissolve silos? Obviously, this disclaimer starts to disarm people. What is the next step after that? Or what might be one of the next steps is better.
The vulnerability piece is important. The disclaimer is important. I also recommend taking the empathetic step a step further in a more practical sense. If it's possible, I largely recommend for people to understand where their stakeholders are coming from. So, for
Mm,
example, a person who's in charge of the integration of a large telecommunication company.
mm-hmm.
She was telling me that her internal client, which are the project managers, they have a lot of conflict. And so she says, I know I should probably go and talk to them and go sit with them. And I said, that's a great place to start.
Yeah.
He's like, yeah, but I don't want them all to gang up on me. And I said, you don't have to do that either. But why don't you just go one by one and talk to
Yes.
them? Because they were off to a bad start. They were with
Yes.
the same company, but they were having
Yes.
so sitting down and again saying, listen, how are we going to solve this? We need to work together. We're just really, it's the wear and tear is getting to be too much. It's not sustainable. How can I get to understand where you're coming from, what your barriers or difficulties are, but not at the expense of me having to also have to
Sure.
so many barriers. How can we make this a win-win?
And
Sometimes sitting down and talking more honestly and frankly is more important because people tend to focus on the problem, but
yeah.
but like I told her, this is really not about the problem. You're annoyed because of the approach that this person took with you
Mhm.
originally. And it's not, you're not really focusing on the problem. It's about the relationship. So
Yeah.
you can't ever forget that there's an underlying relationship thing that you're not talking about.
And I'm thinking about some of the audience who listen to this podcast. Many people are expats who have who have been in corporate life for many years, and who still have that wisdom and experience locked up inside of them, but are now living, say, in Mexico or Costa Rica or Portugal, one of these places, as a different choice outside of their native country, and how they too can use this, because this is just very practical and very, very, seems very loving advice in a way.
Interpersonal relationships. To develop, I mean, it starts with emotional intelligence. Of course, we talk about cultural intelligence, interpersonal intelligence. It's having the social awareness
Yes.
of knowing when and where to say or do certain things
Yes.
and how to approach whoever it is that you're interacting with
Yeah.
in a way that will be well received.
Yeah. And what a gift that is, whether you're a TCK or not, whether you are an expat or not. I mean, that is advice that we can use, it seems, just on a day-to-day basis.
Yes, with our families, right?
Starting with our families, perhaps. Yes.
Exactly.
You bring up the subject of families, and often it's families that precipitate this cross-cultural experience. It can be a cross-cultural family, parents of different nationalities. I'm in a cross-cultural relationship. We've got a Scottish person married to an American.
Huh.
And even after we're coming up on our 40-year anniversary,
Wow.
but I still go, wow, that's a cultural thing. That and I see how ingrained it is. Those 40 years that we've lived together around the world have sort of built up an armor that looks like different flags and different cultural experiences. So I'm just really curious as to how you suggest that we build childlike curiosity and maintain that childlike curiosity, because I think it's easy to generate it for a minute, but it's tiring to generate that long term. So talk to me about childlike curiosity.
That's great. That's a great question because it seems that children are like little sponges. From the time you see toddlers, they're imitating us. And sometimes you realize that they're imitating things that you shouldn't be modeling. So,
Yes, yes.
uh-oh, I just saw something reflected back at me that I shouldn't be showing. But I mean, if you just observe the way that children's eyes light up, I'm thinking, and I remember back when my kids were little, and I learned from my daughter. She was raised in Mexico, and it's
Yes.
very funny because when she went to visit her aunts in Philadelphia, she would call me and she's like, "I'm mad at my aunt Beba because she's joking about me, and I don't like the way she's joking," because it was a little bit of a sarcastic humor, and sometimes humor doesn't
Mhm.
really
Translate.
translate in the
Yeah.
same way. And it
Yeah.
was so cute because she would say, "I know what you're going to say, Mom. I know that this is a cross-cultural issue. And I
Yeah.
understand it in my head, but it still bothers me." So
Yes.
she was so cute. And I mean, she was a teen, a young teen. it was very interesting to see how even in her young age, it was easy for her to distinguish between what
Right.
was cultural and what was
Yes.
personal, right? And
Yeah.
she was very self-aware. She's like, I know that this is something that is normal, but I can't help it. It still bothers me. And I know that I can't take it personally, but I'm mad. So,
But that's great that she had the self-awareness to do that. So that's related to being a childlike. I think is it also part of living in the now? Because children live in the now. Does that help our curiosity? I mean, what is going to help grow our curiosity so we're really genuinely interested rather than fake interested?
that's a great question. I don't know. What do you think? I have
I
no
I
idea.
I I think maybe living in the now. I think that I could do better at that. I think many of the people I surround myself, we can all of us can do better at that. And that's one of the reasons I play pickleball.
Ah, okay. Very therapeutic. Right?
Well,
Well, I
yes,
yeah.
you are in the moment, and you can. And in pickleball, you have to just react, and it may not be the right thing to do, but it is living in the moment. And I think that living in the moment can bring us joy. What else could we do?
I agree. And I think that I've been noticing, I don't know if you have, Doreen, but I've been noticing a lot more that for example, in social media, even in LinkedIn, I've been noticing a lot of
Mhm.
people talking about, hey, you know what? It's important to be mindful. It's important to not just be
Yes,
swept away with the frenzy of social media, even though you're probably looking at social media telling you shouldn't be looking at
yes,
social media.
yes.
But I can tell you that I have definitely try to become more aware that of course there's many things vying for our attention, but at the same time, sometimes we just need to put all of the devices down and enjoy that moment with the kid,
Mm,
with the grandkid, with the
mm,
spouse, just looking at the beautiful environment. Every time I go
mm.
back to Cuernavaca, it's like my heart grows again just looking at the beautiful fruit trees and the bougainvillea and oh, I just
Yes,
breathe easier. And I think that moving from one place to another, even as as a third culture kid or even as an adult, you realize the beauty of our earth. You need to appreciate that. The people and the beauty of the place and the beauty of the diversity that exists on our planet, right?
and that's I think another part of the childlike curiosity is living in awe.
Yes.
And it rained here last night. And we have just had three of the hottest months on record in this city, in the mountains, 6,600 feet high. And it's almost like you can feel everybody in the planet, and every leaf is just breathing better today.
Wow. Yes, that's life coming back at you.
Yes, it is. It's just wonderful. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you so much, Maria. It's great to get to know you and to hear about your experiences of growing up. Now, tell us, where can people find you if they're looking for you? And I will put this in the show notes.
Oh, okay. Well, you can find me either on LinkedIn,
Uh-huh.
Maria Garaitonandia, and my website is called globalbridgestraining.com.
Globalbridgestraining.com, everybody. This is where you can find Maria, and we can and stay in touch with her. Make sure you reach out because clearly she has a lots of experience and a great depth of knowledge in this subject. Now, just before we close, I have a question that I've started asking. If you were to grant people, not just expats and nomads, but if you were to grant people who are moving around the planet one superpower, what one superpower would you grant them?
I like the idea of being able to look into people's hearts. It would
Mm,
probably solve a lot of
mm,
misunderstandings and conflict.
yes,
That would
yes,
be wonderful.
yes. So spotlight into people's hearts. And if you were to take a particular food with you, if I banished you to an island for a year or forever, what one food would you take with you that really symbolizes your joy of being alive and eating?
Okay. I would have to go to my parents' culture, Cuban culture.
Uh-huh.
And it would be the guava pastries, the pastelitos de guayaba. They are, and I eat them anytime I go to Miami. They are delicious.
Excellent. Pastelitas de guayaba.
Yes.
Gracias. Thank you.
De nada.
Well, thank you so much for this, Maria. This has been delightful. And we'll make sure that we encourage the audience to go and find you in the show notes.
Thank you.
Sayonara, masalama, and hasta luego, everybody.